All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I thank Senators Stabenow, Van Hollen, and Padilla for joining me. Now, of course, we had a lot to discuss at the lunch today, but top of mind was, for everyone, was default. As everybody knows, yesterday I went to the White House with Leader McConnell, Leader Jeffries, Speaker McCarthy. And from that meeting, there was bad news and good news. The bad news: Speaker McCarthy was the only person in the room who refused to take default off the table. The one person standing in the way is Speaker McCarthy. He refused to take default off the table. President Biden said he would. Leader Jeffries said he would. I would. And Leader McConnell outside didn't say anything in the room, and outside he too said we must avoid default. But instead, Speaker McCarthy doubled down on his efforts, and rather than take default off the table, he's going to take it hostage at the hands of a far-right agenda that the American people would abhor. Avoiding default should not be contingent on passing the GOP's hard right partisan agenda, and the American people overwhelmingly agree. A recent Washington Post poll found the following, very instructive. 58% majority of Americans say debt limit and federal spending should be handled as separate issues, as we are saying, and President Biden is saying. The poll also found that, quote, a much smaller 26% of Americans say Congress should only allow the government to pay its debts if Biden agrees to cut spending. That's McCarthy's plan. Not only does it have only 26% of America, but it doesn't even have a plurality of Republicans. 46% of Republicans say the debt limit and spending should be handled separately. So even a plurality of Republicans realize how dangerous tying the two together is. Now, and one other point I'd make. It's very easy, not easy. It's unique for what McCarthy is doing. Back in 2017, we Democrats hated the Trump tax cuts for the very, very wealthy. I easily could have said, as minority leader, we're going to withhold the ability, withhold the ability to raise our debt ceiling unless they repeal the tax cuts. But of course I wouldn't do that. It was dangerous and reckless. But now he is taking the IRA, an issue of great importance to the Democrats, probably our #1 issue, and saying he will hold it hostage to default. So it shows you the difference here and the uniqueness of what McCarthy is doing. But there was good news as well in that meeting. Today, top staffs of all 5 principals are sitting down right now as we speak and talking about a path forward for the budget and appropriations process, and they're going to continue to meet during the week. Speaker McCarthy will have plenty to say over the budget and the appropriations process. He wants to make cuts. That's the place to discuss it. That's the place we've always discussed it. We want to close loopholes and make sure the wealthy pay their fair share. Again, it's the budget appropriations process that's the place to be. And so the bottom line is very simple, and that is that McCarthy can certainly have his say, and his caucus can have the say, on spending cuts, but not holding it hostage to default. Not holding it hostage to default, but rather in the budget and appropriations process. Okay? So if Speaker McCarthy would simply commit to taking default off the table, we're happy to engage in a separate conversation with Republicans on the budget. In the meantime, I urge the Speaker and my Republican colleagues to come to their senses about avoiding default. Time is of the essence, and there's nothing stopping us from coming together in a bipartisan way, as we regularly have, to assure America can pay its bills. Senator Stabenow.
Well, good afternoon, and I think it's important to say one more time that there's only one of the 4 leaders in Congress who will not take default off the table. Only one person. Speaker McCarthy. And he's choosing economic chaos in a very real way, economic chaos for our country over what's best for the American people. A default, as opposed to a government shutdown, a default affects every kind of spending that the federal government does, from Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, defense, SNAP, and every farm support program. So I want to speak for a moment as chair of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, where we are working very hard to get another bipartisan 5-year farm bill, even in the midst of all of this chaos that's been going on. But it's very clear that a Republican default on America would be an unprecedented disaster for rural America and for our agriculture economy. Interest rates on all forms of credit would rise. Most farmers rely on access to credit to finance their operations, while commodity prices would fall dramatically. USDA would likely be unable to issue key direct loans and loan guarantees. Federal crop insurance would be heavily impacted, in addition to the important food assistance programs for our seniors, for our children, for our families. They would be cut as well, and they already only provide $6 a day per person to avoid starvation in our country. In short, when we look at all of this, a default would be a disaster for farmers and families across the country. But this doesn't have to happen. It's in Speaker McCarthy's hands right now. Right now. It's up to him. Is he going to step up and lead and make sure America pays its bills and that we keep our commitments? Or is he going to bend to the most extreme elements in the Republican Party who seem very much to want chaos for our economy? Speaker McCarthy, don't let America default.
So it's a pleasure to join with Leader Schumer and Senator Stabenow, Senator Padilla, to emphasize what has to happen right now in order to protect our country and protect the economy. And that is that Speaker McCarthy needs to take his finger off the default detonator, because if he pushes that default detonator, it will have devastating consequences. You will have an economic meltdown. It's economic Armageddon. You'll wipe out millions of jobs. You'll wipe out people's retirement savings. You will also see a huge increase in interest rates. So Speaker McCarthy needs to defuse that bomb and make sure that we then proceed with the discussion on the budget on the separate track. And let me just say a few words about that. I serve on the Budget Committee. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. President Biden and all of us have been very clear from the beginning that we're more than happy to sit down and discuss budget issues and appropriation issues in that forum, just not under the threat of blowing up our economy. President Biden has submitted a budget. It's $3 trillion in deficit reduction over 10 years. And we know that this is not about deficit reduction from our Republican colleagues, because they're not willing to consider 1 penny of increase in taxes on very rich people in order to reduce the deficit. They say they care about the deficit, but they're not asking billionaires to contribute 1 penny more. They say they care about the deficit. They're not willing to ask big corporations to pay 1 penny more. So no one should believe that Republicans actually care about reducing the deficit. What we need to do, as President Biden has said, is go talk about how we're going to address the budget. And we're more than happy to consider some of their proposals and cuts in that context, and they need to consider some of our proposals in that context. I will point out that President Biden does have cuts in his budget. He asks the pharmaceutical companies to contribute more. He's going to cut the amount that we pay to Big Pharma for prescription drugs. So he has proposed cuts as part of his budget. But let's take that conversation, that discussion to its appropriate place, and Speaker McCarthy, take your finger off the default detonator. That's our message, and we hope that reason will prevail in his caucus. Now let me turn it over to Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Leader Schumer, Senators Stabenow, Van Hollen. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Well, I'm absolutely frustrated that House Republicans are holding the American people hostage once again. Can't exactly say that I'm surprised. See, time and again, extreme MAGA Republicans have attacked our democracy. They've attacked our constitutional rights, and now they're threatening America's economy. So yes, today we're saying that default cannot, should not be on the negotiating table. And forcing the country to default for the first time in our nation's history shouldn't even be part of the conversation. This is about protecting the American people and what they have already earned. You know, if we get to that point, here's what people should be very well aware of and what to expect. You know, I think of the working families across California and across the country who work so hard and sacrifice so much to buy a home and make their mortgage payments. If we were to default, mortgage rates would skyrocket. Working families would pay the price. I think of veterans who served our country in uniform and were willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice, but who would have their veterans' benefits interrupted if we go into default. And I think of the millions of seniors across the country who would see their Social Security benefits halted because Speaker McCarthy and MAGA Republicans want to hold them hostage for their extreme demands. The list goes on and on. Now, as we've heard from all the senators up here, we can absolutely have a responsible conversation about spending in this country. There is a time and a place for that. That's the budget and appropriations process. Not, however, as we approach a fiscal cliff, when we know full well that it will be working families across the country who stand to lose the most. The good news is there's still a little bit of time. Republicans still have time to come to the table and avoid a debt default, just as they've done numerous times in the past under both Republican and Democratic presidents. But if they don't, countless families across the country will be coming to their kitchen tables to have a much more dire financial conversation. Speaker McCarthy, Republicans don't default on America. Thank you.
Okay, be ready. Right there.
This is Speaker McCarthy's first rodeo with the debt limit. So your experience, so is Leader McConnell with this issue. So can you persuade Senator McConnell to take a more active role?
Well, you know, Speaker McConnell has said repeatedly it's between the president and McCarthy. McCarthy takes default off the table, problem solved. Yes. Yeah, this guy.
How do you feel about Tucker Carlson, former Fox host, launching his show now on Elon Musk's Twitter?
I'm not going to comment on that. Everyone has a right to make their views known where they can. Yes, way back there. Well, I was calling. Okay, both of you. Go ahead. Two tall guys. Yes. Well, as you know, I care passionately about this. I'm the author of both the Brady Law and the assault weapons ban, and our caucus is having a meeting devoted exclusively to talking about the next best step forward on guns. I was very happy last summer that we were able to move forward for the first time in 30 years on guns, and maybe we can do that again. I'd like to see that. Yes.
Senator McConnell's advice to the president is to do what Pelosi did with Trump in 2019 and negotiate something like a 2-year tax deal alongside a debt limit increase. Is that potentially a way out?
Look, the bottom line is very simple. McConnell has said it should be between McCarthy and the president. There's only one person standing in the way of avoiding default, and that's Speaker McCarthy. He ought to back off, plain and simple. Yes.
But would you be willing to accept real spending cuts, actual spending cuts that would move alongside a separate track than a debt ceiling increase?
Look, the bottom line is we've always debated spending cuts, revenue increases, as Chris pointed out, in the budget and appropriations process. That's going along now. But again, default should not be, we should not be using default as a hostage. Only McCarthy is. It's dangerous, it's reckless, it could lead to real problems.
Mr. Leader,
Thank you.